miles northeast of Philadelphia. And I found your site because my son is Sean Egglestone, who worked on the Eugene Plant-Based Providers website.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see what he had been working on, and I found the site, and I started exploring and finding lots of great information and videos, and here I am.
Hey,
Well, welcome to you, Marcia. We'd love to have you, and all the way from Pennsylvania, no less.
Yeah, thank you.
and Sean's a really nice guy. We've gotten to meet him a few times at meetings, so it's been great.
Yep. He's very passionate about healthy eating.
Anybody else who might be new, first time, or been here for a couple times and want to share something?
I've been only attended one other meeting, but I know Scott and the great work that you guys do. But just to say that Velvet was just talking about this great resource people might want to be looking at. Chef AJ put together this huge bundle of information about weight loss and how to adhere to this kind of lifestyle. Lots of support by amazing contributors, $4,900 worth of resources for $49. And it really is amazing. She's been interviewing a lot of the contributors, and you can get an idea of the content if you go to her YouTube channel. So just something to share with people if they want to check it out.
Well, thanks for reinforcing that. Yes, Velvet.
They also, I was just thinking, and I was like, we better not wait till next week, because if anyone's interested, I think the last day is tomorrow. But typically they do these bundles every 3 months or so. So it's interesting to, like, you get so many different cookbooks. They're all ebooks, you know, that you download online. So you have to have a computer, but it's nice to have those resources.
Nice. All right. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more comments, and then Scott's got a full suitcase for tonight of information.
Well, hi, it's Dolly.
Hello, Dolly.
I just wanted to tell you that over this weekend, I totally plant-based our kitchen.
Wow.
So there you go.
Congratulations. I know you've been working on that for a little while, and good for you.
Thank you.
Ready to go, Dolly and Hank? Yeah.
I'd also like to give a plug to the website Cooking with Shada. She lost over 120 pounds eating this way with Chef AJ and Nutmeg Notebook. And I've been making several of her recipes, and they're hugely flavorful and easy. It's been really fun. And Shada is SHAYDA.
SHAYDA. Okay. So that's on YouTube, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Any other words of wisdom? Or new people who want to share how you found out about the class and why you're here?
And someone named Lynn in the chat wrote her mic isn't working. She was just commenting on Dr. Furman. She's been following and listening to him. And that was actually the first book I read was throughout the process was Eat to Live, Dr. Furman. So yeah, that's all along the lines here. Whole food, plant-based. Calls it nutritarian, which just means, you know, really focusing on the nutrients in the foods and things.
Lisa, you unmuted a bit. You want to say hello or?
Yes, hi. Also, just updated my schedule for the next 5 weeks or so. If anyone wanted to meet with me one-on-one for some more health coaching for free, as always, I will put the link in the chat and my email. I also just wanted to point out that every so often I share about the class with our Western U colleagues, and I think there are a few that actually showed up tonight. I won't make them say anything, but I just wanted to point it out because it's really exciting for me to see them here. And I know a lot of you are always looking for the medical students here too.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because I couldn't tell that they were the medical students, but that really does excite us. And, you know, we jump up and down actually with excitement at times. And I'm thrilled. Thank you.
Thank you.
And welcome to the students who've taken the leap here for tonight. Okay, what do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get going here. Share my screen.
This is going to be a fun class. Scott's going to be talking about, I believe, the myths and other popular diets. And it's an important topic. We all live under a bunch of myths. I did, and maybe I still do, but I know for sure there's a lot I did live under. And so, Scott, fire away.
Yeah, good. My volume seem okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So let's start with a German proverb: an old error is always more popular than a new truth. So I like that one. It's because some of this might be new information to some of you not so much. So we're going to start off with a couple of definitions, reductionism and holism. And so I'm just going to start off by talking about reductionism, and what it really means is breaking things down into its smaller parts. So, and when it comes to nutrition, it's understanding single nutrients and single mechanisms. Kind of like if you think about, anything in technology, we've thrived on the reductionist type of philosophy and line of thinking. And what that really means in different things in science and technology is we figure out how things work. So we break things down into the smaller parts, look at how mechanisms, how things work, chemical reactions, all these different things. And that's how we figured out how to, develop medications and technologies, and how we have electricity and just everything, pretty much everything in society that we have from a science and technology standpoint. We figured out how things work based on a reductionist line of thinking. So it's a really important aspect. And when it comes to nutrition, though, you're going to see how it's important, but it's not really the most important thing. And when it comes to nutrition, just think about all the different nutrients that are in foods and all the different mechanisms that are going on when it comes to how food affects our health. And a lot of the things that we talk about in these classes, Dr. Greger's videos, a lot of the things are fairly reductionist. And you're going to I'm just going to try to help you to define these things and then compare it with holism, and so that you can kind of in your mind think about these two things separately, and you can kind of compartmentalize, okay, that's a reductionist thing, that's a holistic thing, and kind of be able to separate those two things. But I think it's so important because a lot of times after you take these classes, and hopefully you repeat the classes and attend them as long as you need with Charlie and I, just so you can kind of keep learning new skills and keep learning new information. But then, the rest of the time, 99.9% of your life, you're not going to be in these classes. And so you have to have the skill set of how to absorb new information. When new information comes in about a food or a nutrient or whatever, you can take what you learned tonight and apply it and be able to figure out what's important, maybe what's not so important. And you can kind of look, okay, that's more reductionist or that's more holistic, and you can kind of differentiate these things. And so that's what I'm hoping you'll get out of tonight's class here in the first part. So that's what reductionist is: breaking things down to smaller parts, understanding single nutrients and single mechanisms. So holism, on the flip side, is looking at the big picture. So it's thousands of nutrients, thousands of mechanisms come together to create what's called holism. Kind of like don't miss the forest for the trees. And so a good analogy I like to use when it comes to food and nutrition is basically applying it to like an orchestra. So say you went to the Bach Festival or something, and you went and listened to a concerto, listened to a full orchestra. And so each of the individual instruments that are playing in the orchestra, that's the reductionist, that's the little components. And so if you just think about if you listen to to Mozart or something, and it was only one instrument, it was just all flutes or just all strings or just all the same exact instrument. It's not going to sound the same as when it's all the different instruments put together. You have this beautiful sound that comes out with all the different instruments, right? And so that when you equate that to food, then all of the micronutrients, all the carbohydrates, the fat, the protein, all the thousands of phytonutrients and micronutrients that make up the food, those are all those little nutrients are the musical instruments, and the food is the orchestra. The food is the sound that comes out. And so think about those two things in concert, basically. So all the nutrients are the instruments, and the sound that comes out, the orchestra, is the food. And so holism is the food, is the big picture. And so any questions about that? Reductionist, kind of what that is, holism, what that is, as far as the whole is the whole sum of all the parts together. Does that make sense? Okay. So reductionism, we're going to kind of give you some basic nutrition education here and kind of focus on reductionism at the moment. So we have protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So we're going to talk about each of these things. And what macronutrients are the components of food that contain calories. So our calories all come from protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Technically, water is a macronutrient as well, but it doesn't have calories. It's very important for our health, but it doesn't contain calories, but it is considered a macronutrient. And so we're going to talk about each of these things in detail here. And micronutrients are the other parts of food, and they don't contain calories, but they're very, very important. So micronutrients, examples of micronutrients are vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, phytochemicals. So phyto means plant. And so phytonutrients and phytochemicals, the best way to describe what these are inside plant foods are basically the immune system of the plant. So a plant, when it grows, it has to have an immune system. It has to fight off bugs and other pests and things in the environment that might affect its health. And so it has to have its own immune system, just like we have our immune system. And that's the best way to describe what phytonutrients and phytochemicals are, the immune system of the plant. And they're very, very healthy for us when we consume them. So they're very, very important, but they don't contain calories. So those are our macronutrients and micronutrients, is what is contained in the food we eat. So again, just to sum up holism, simply the food. So broccoli, for example, contains all macronutrients, all three macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrates, including water, and thousands of micronutrients. So the holism is the broccoli. All the component parts are the reductionist, are the actual components of it. But what's important here is the food, the whole of it is what's healthy, and what makes a food healthy is the food, not just the nutrients that it contains. And I think one of the things I wanted to share with you guys about micronutrients and some of the things is that I actually read a whole textbook when I was first starting out my education in nutrition at this point over 9 years ago. I got a textbook, some graduate level textbooks from Oregon State University's nutrition program. And one of the textbooks, it'll sound really boring to you, but one of the textbooks I read from cover to cover was the evidence-based information on micronutrients, and basically on all the different micronutrients and phytochemicals and phytonutrients. And it was basically what they were doing in this textbook is they're testing out all the different micronutrients that they could to see what is it about some of these micronutrients that bring health. And so just for an example I like to give is back when I was first studying this, I had identified over 100 phytonutrients and phytochemicals in a strawberry, for example. And that's how many they had identified at that time, 9 years ago when I was reading this textbook. And so we knew that at the time and it's still true today, that we know that strawberries, for example, reduce the risk of breast cancer, for example. And so the goal with the science is, okay, well, what is it about a strawberry that lowers the risk for breast cancer? Because kind of the goal and with research is they want to be able to identify which micronutrients are reducing the risk of breast cancer, so they can kind of basically concentrate it, put it into a pill, test it like you do with any other drugs, pharmaceuticals, and then, basically make profit off of being able to market it, right? So it kind of makes sense. That's kind of how technology and science works a lot of times, because to fund a study, you got to have some sort of, payoff at the end of it. And so what was interesting about reading this complete textbook was that every time they would try to identify a certain number of micronutrients, they discover more, and they would make it into a pill, and they would do a randomized controlled trial on these things. And every single time they weren't getting any results. That was coming up empty. So it didn't actually show to have any benefit. And in some cases, some of the vitamins and minerals and things that were tested were actually shown to be harmful. So it's, kind of the lesson from all of that was, well, it's not just doing a high concentration of any particular vitamin, mineral, micronutrient, like a phytonutrient that's not what's healthy. It's the whole strawberry that's healthy. So basically we can't outsmart Mother Nature. Basically, it's basically just eat the strawberry. That's what provides the lower risk of breast cancer. It's a kind of a concert. It's basically the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's not, because it's thousands of micronutrients, thousands of mechanisms that are coming together that's creating this strawberry, this whole food that's actually is what is healthy. And so now, I'd said there was 100 phytonutrients identified 9 years ago in a strawberry. Now it's over 1,000. So we're just learning as we study this more and more, we're learning that it's so complex. Food is so complex. And so that's what I wanted you to take away from that particular slide. All right. So let's talk about starch. So starch is we're gonna kind of come into carbohydrates here, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about what starch is. So starch is really a scientific term. You might be thinking, starch on your collar, things like that, as far as what starch is, but really what starch is accurately is it's the storage organ for a plant. So it's a carbohydrate depot. Carbohydrates are stored in a starch for the rest of the plant that is growing above. So like potatoes and beans and nuts and seeds, those are starchy foods, and starchy foods are just pure energy storage for the plant that's growing above. And so that's all you really need to know about that. And you remember from the calorie density lecture, they're a little bit higher in calories than, say, regular non-starchy vegetables, but they're really important for our health because they're great sources of energy. They contain, micronutrients and protein and fat and carbohydrates and fiber and water and everything that we need to be healthy, but they're a little bit higher in calories to make you feel more full and satisfied, as opposed to if you're just eating non-starchy vegetables. So this is a good segue. Talking about starch is a good segue into carbohydrates, or carbs for short. So when I was presenting this particular talk live when I was doing them live at the church a few years ago, I could get I could see everybody in the audience, and so I could kind of get a show of hands. And so just I can see a few of you here. So everybody raise your hand if you view, so carbs, that word carbs, is that a positive or negative word? So would you say, maybe before you started attending these classes, would you say that was a positive word or a negative word? So raise your hand if you thought it was a negative word before you started learning about this. Put my hand up, right? So, because I thought, well, carbs, we should avoid them. It's just sugar, right? It just turns into sugar, and I should avoid those. But now, hopefully, you can view it as a positive word. It's just the type of carbohydrates what's important, and we're going to talk about that next. So the thing I wanted to talk about before that is that a carb is not a whole food. So a carbohydrate is a macronutrient, as you learned, right? So it's one component. It's one of the macronutrients that provides us with calories. And so it's not a food. So the thing that I hope that you guys will start to do after this class and going forward is that you will actually not choose foods based on what the macronutrients are that they contain. So sometimes someone will say, well, I'm trying to cut my carbs. It's like, well, what does that mean? Because that's what food do you associate with carbohydrates? Because every food has, like a potato, has a lot of carbohydrates, but it also has fat, it also has protein, it also has vitamins, minerals, micronutrients, fiber, water. It's a food. And so I want people to not think about macronutrients when they talk about what they're eating. I want you all to think about what foods are you selecting, because it's the food that's important. So food-based nutrition is what's important, not macronutrients, not reductionist of all the little micronutrients and macronutrients that we're talking about here tonight. That's not what's important. It's what's the food that you're eating. And so, a potato is not a carb, it's a whole food, as an example. And so saying good or bad for a carbohydrate is kind of vague. It doesn't really, what does that really mean? What's a good carb? What's a bad carb? Some of us might know terms like complex carbohydrate, simple carbohydrate, the glycemic index, things like that. And that's all still pretty complicated way to think about it. Because what the question you want to ask when you're just talking about carbohydrates is it processed or unprocessed? And another word for processed would be refined. Processed or refined, those would be the carbohydrates that you want to avoid. Unprocessed, unrefined, those are the types of carbohydrates you want to eat. Those are the good kind. And so that's, when you're thinking about carbohydrates, it's good to understand those two types, but still you want to go back to saying, okay, well, it's a carbohydrate, which is just one of the 3 macronutrients that provides us with calories. It's not a food. A food is a food, and you start talking about what foods you're eating rather than what macronutrient you're eating. So it's not like you're trying to choose a food based on what's the macronutrient it contains. I'm not going to eat this food for protein, this food for carbohydrates, this food for fat, because it's all of the foods that we eat have all 3 of those things in them. It's just you want the right types of these macronutrients, but you want to still be just thinking about the food that these nutrients are contained in. So I'm going to give you another video of Jeff Novick here. And this is actually the same lecture that's the full calorie density lecture, which I actually have up on the website under videos. But this is the little section I spliced out from when he talks about carbohydrates. And so I don't know if you guys have already seen this, but this is the little section on carbohydrates, which kind of is going to sum up carbohydrates from what I've explained so far.
So I mentioned this yesterday. Let's just briefly touch on carbohydrates, because people are so confused. You could come here 2-3 times, listen to these talks, and walk out and you go, yeah, but should I really eat carbs? Right? Right. Well, why should you eat them? I mentioned it last night. High carbohydrate foods, if they're the right carbs, are the richest sources of vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, microminerals, trace minerals, and energy. They're the best fuel for your body. This is why you want to eat them. Now, if you cut out foods that are high in carbs, you can lose weight because you'll cut out calories, but you're also going to mortgage your long-term health for short-term weight loss because you're going to cut out the most nutrient-rich foods. So you don't want to do it. Now, the problem is nobody really knows how to tell a good carb from a bad carb. We know there's a difference. There's good fats and bad fats. There's good carbs and bad carbs. And you hear things like glycemic index, right? And you hear things like complex and simple, right? Have you all heard that? To me, those are all way too complex. I've made it simpler. If you want to know the difference between the carbs you should eat and the carbs you might want to avoid, it's this test. The carbs you should eat are unrefined, and the ones you should avoid are the refined. And unrefined carbs are very simple. You could eat them the way they grow in the garden. Make sense? So this potato, grow in the garden? Can you eat it this way except for the fact you might cook it or peel it? So it's good for you? Okay, but what if I cut it up into sticks, put it in the deep fryer for a little bit? And no, what did I change about it? I refined or processed it in some way, and the more I do it, the worse it gets. So this is really the simplest way. Can I eat it the way it grew in the garden, except for the fact that I might want to cook it or peel it? Very simple. You don't have to be a biochemist to get this. So now the problem was in 1980, when they looked around the world and they looked at all the long-lived populations, they ate diets that were very high in carbs. I'm going to show you the numbers. Somewhere 80, 85% carbohydrates. And that's why they recommended we eat more carbs and less fat. And what they meant was that we should eat carbs like this: brown rice, oatmeal, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, starchy vegetables, leafy greens, even potatoes. These were the foods they were hoping we would eat. They're very low in calories, very low in calorie density. They're packed with water, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. All the fresh fruits, veggies, starchy vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. But is this what Americans ate since 1980? No, this is what they ate. All these that are packed with calories, packed in calorie density, stripped of the nutrients. All the cakes, cookies, crackers, pretzels, chips, all the rest. So what you're looking at makes up 90% of the carbohydrate intake in the United States. 90% of the carbs we eat are white flour, white sugar, white rice, white pasta. The average adult American eats 0.9 servings of whole grains a day. That's it, 0.9. So we got heavy on these, and what did we blame? Corn, grapes, right? People are afraid to eat these foods, yet they didn't cause the problem. Now, when we refine a food, three things happen, and I put them here because we're going to come back to it in a minute. The first thing that happens is you take out the water, all right? It's one of the ways you dry fruit or you, right? Second is you take out or you reduce the amount of fiber. And the third is you reduce or eliminate nutrients. The more refining and processing you do, the more this happens. So these are going to be important in a few minutes, so realize this is what refining does. Now, here's an example. What I'm showing you is 200 calories of corn. On the left is cornmeal. And I know it looks like a sunny side up egg, but especially by now, but it's a cornmeal. On the right is 200 calories of corn. Now, which one do you think is better for you? The one on the right. Which do you think tastes better? The one on the right. Which do you think has more fiber, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and everything else good for you? The one on the right. And this tastes great. How many of you love corn? We all do, right? How many of you have ever sat down in front of the TV with a bag of cornmeal and a spoon? Some of you were reluctant, but I thought you were going to raise your hand. Okay, so then if I make this into this in order to get you to eat it, what do I got to do to it? I got to probably add a little oil, maybe a little salt, maybe a little sugar, make it into something. Definitely put some salt and sugar in it so you'll eat it. So for 25 years, Americans have been getting fat on this, right? Then you ask them how they got heavy, and what do they blame? Corn. Wasn't the corn. So that's carbohydrates. You got the difference? Real simple. You don't have to be a biochemist.
All right. Before I move on to fat, any questions or comments about carbohydrates? Do you guys understand what's the kind of carbohydrates we want to eat and the kind of carbohydrates we want to avoid? Pretty straightforward. But the overall underlying lesson is we don't choose foods for carbohydrates. We choose food because we know it's the healthiest package, right? All right. So let's talk about fat. So we all know about good fats and bad fats. So we're going to go from worst fat to best fat. So we'll start with trans fats, which are the worst fats. So examples would be like Crisco, margarine, kind of those processed, the most highly processed fats. And trans fats not quite as big of an issue anymore because trans fats were so bad for heart disease and even cancer and things like that, that it's actually now been outlawed from the food supply. So there's actually no more trans fats allowed in the processed foods. The only trans fats you really could get now, or actually there are some natural trans fats in animal products. And so meat and dairy has a little bit of trans fat in it, not a lot, but a little bit. And it's just hydrogenated, highly hydrogenated types of fats. Synthetic fats were the worst. And so not as big of an issue, like I said, because it's now been outlawed from the food supply. The next worst would be saturated fat, which is that, mainly the fats in animal products, meat and dairy products. There is a little bit of saturated fat in some plants like coconuts and some nut, and basically nuts have a small amount. But mostly when you think of saturated fat, you think of animal fat. And a good example of that is what a saturated fat is so if you take bacon grease, so if you fried up a bunch of bacon, when it's hot, it's liquid, right? So you have a leftover grease in your bacon, in your pan that you cook the bacon. What happens to that when you leave it out at room temperature for an hour or two? What happens to it? It turns solid, right? And so you can actually spoon it out. It's kind of white, and you can spoon it out and put it in a jar. And that's what saturated fat is, because at room temperature, it's solid at room temperature, basically. And that's the worst fat when it comes to heart disease, when it clogs up the arteries. Actually, also, we talk about the diabetes class, it's the type of fat that inhibits insulin's effectiveness the most. It causes a lot of toxic byproducts inside the cell. So we'll get into that more when we do the diabetes class. But so it's that type of fat that we want to avoid the most. And then we can talk about what the good fats are. And the good fats are the unsaturated fats. So those are the fats that are liquid at room temperature, unsaturated. That's what that means. And like olive oil is mostly a monounsaturated fat, and then there's polyunsaturated fats. And just examples of these will be vegetable oils. So vegetable oils are mono and polyunsaturated, but they came from a food, because oil is a highly processed product, and it came from a plant. So nuts and seeds, avocados. So olives, olive oil comes from olives. And then it takes like 40 olives to make a tablespoon of olive oil. So you stripped out all the fiber, nutrients, and everything, and you're just left with the fat. And same with avocados, so avocado oil, things like that. So the good fats are the fats that you get from the food, because as you learn, there's no such thing as a no fat diet. Even broccoli has fat. So every food that we eat has fat in it, and so the fats that you want are the fats that are in the healthiest food packages that you get. So these unsaturated fats, they're better, they're much better in comparison to the saturated fats. And so these are the fats that you might hear as heart healthy, things like that. But how we get our fats from our food is what we really want to do, because we're going to talk about oil here in a minute. But so the fats that you want are the fats that are just naturally occurring in the healthiest food packages that we can get. But I can't talk about fat without talking about fish. And so fish has healthy fat in it, the omega-3 fats, but it also contains saturated fat. So even fish, even though it has some healthy fat in it, also has the saturated animal fat in it as well. So and it also contains cholesterol and methyl mercury and dioxins and other pollutants and things. And so fish is not an overall healthy package, even though it has some healthy fat in it. But when we say, is fish healthy, it's like, well, compared to what? Is fish healthy compared to bacon? Yes. But is fish healthy compared to eating nuts and seeds and avocados and all the other whole plant foods? No. And so, we don't, again, this is another example of we're talking about fat, but we don't want to choose a food because it has a certain fat, necessarily have a fat in it. You're not trying to seek out fat, because you're going to get all the fat you need just from eating a whole food plant-based diet. Just eating the way pretty much any diet you eat, you're going to get enough fat no matter what you're eating. There's no such thing as a no fat food or zero fat diet, basically. And so the types of fats, these are the good fats that you want. And so the best way to get the omega-3s that we talked about in these classes is to eat chia seeds, flax seeds, your flax meal, walnuts. Those are all contain a lot of these healthier mono and polyunsaturated fats, and you're getting it from a nice whole plant food. And then also we talked about with the omega-3s, you're getting from the seaweed, like the nori and wakame and some of these types of things. The sea vegetables, you're going to be getting the healthy fats. So these are the fats you want. Any questions about fat? But before let me talk about oil, and then if there's any questions about oil and fat, I'll pause for a second. So oil, I have to always talk about this whole slide for this, because so many people think that oil is a healthy food, and they think, well, I need oil, we need fat, right? It's like, well, yeah, we do need fat. And even if you're eating 100% whole food, plant-based diet, no processed foods whatsoever, and no animal products whatsoever, you're still getting 10 to 15% of your calories are still coming from fat. And so again, there's no such thing as a no fat diet. And so oil is really just a highly processed food. It's basically the sugar equivalent. It's the fat equivalent of sugar. It's basically the same thing as making refined white sugar from sugar beets or sugar cane. It's just a highly processed food. And so if you're, whether it's coconut oil, palm oil, corn oil, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, or motor oil, it's just 100% fat. It's just completely 100% fat, highly processed. There's basically no nutrient value whatsoever. And if you're trying to lose weight, it's the highest calorie product on the planet. It's 9 calories per gram, 120 calories per tablespoon, and 4,000 calories a pound. You remember that on the calorie density chart I went over a few weeks ago. If you're trying to lose weight, you don't want to add oil, because anytime you do, it's going to just add calories and it's not going to satisfy hunger. So as you remember from the calorie density talk, only protein and carbohydrates actually are satisfying, satiating, actually lower our appetite and make us feel full. Oil, fat really has little to no contribution to feeling full. So it's just a way to add calories that easily stored as fat. The fat we eat is the fat we wear. And so you want to avoid the oil. And then just as a comparison, so fat's 9 calories per gram, carbohydrates and protein are only 4 calories per gram. So that's why by cutting out the fat, you can cut out a lot of calories as compared to carbohydrates and protein, which are only 4 calories per gram. And then starches, when you start actually talking about a food, so really, fat and carbohydrates and protein are macronutrients, right? And starches, now when we talk about a starch, that's really a whole food. And so a whole starch food, like let's say like a potato, that's only 1 calorie per gram. And you're probably thinking, well, how's that work if there's fat, protein, and carbohydrates and say a potato, which is a starch, and fat's 9 calories per gram and protein and carbohydrate are 4 calories per gram, how is a starch like a potato only 1 calorie per gram? Well, because what else does a potato or a starchy vegetable contain? It contains water, which has no calories. It contains fiber, which has no calories. And it's in this matrix, this whole package just right for you. And by weight, it's only about 1 calorie per gram. You probably remember on the calorie density chart, potatoes are only about 400 to 450 calories per pound. And so that kind of makes sense when you think about it, because if any of you know the metric system, I believe it's 454 grams per pound. So there you go. So starch is only about 1 calorie per gram. So you can see how you lose weight when you're eating foods that are 400 to 500 calories per pound, because you'll feel full before you'll ever eat too many calories. So again, the same thing as making refined white sugar is what oil is. It's just the ultimate junk food. And then probably the most important thing here is this last item, which oil actually injures your arteries. And when we talk about the cardiovascular disease, heart disease, at a class coming up in a few weeks, we'll talk more about this, but the endothelial cells are our life jackets of our arteries, and we need them to dilate our arteries and keep plaque from forming and keep our arteries and blood flowing smoothly. And oil actually injures those little cells that make the nitric oxide, which dilates our arteries and keeps our arteries healthy and blood flowing smoothly. And so oil actually injures our arteries. And so it's another reason to not consume oil. So any questions about fat? Here's kind of the summary slide of fat. Get your fat from whole plant foods, not from processed or refined foods. But remember, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. Questions about fat? Ready to move on to protein. All right, we're going to start off on protein. We're going to start off listening to Dr. McDougall. This is off of his website from a few years ago. It's just a good little summary of protein.
Hello, I'm Dr. John McDougall, and I want to talk to you a little bit about some basic nutrition. When I mention a plant food-based diet, or a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet, you know I don't use this terminology to describe our program. Our program is known as a starch-based diet. In other words, the center of the diet is rice, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, with the addition of fruits and vegetables. That's the McDougall diet, is a starch-based diet. The first thing that your friends and relatives say or think is, oh no, this is a protein deficient diet. I'm not going to be able to get enough protein if I switch to that kind of diet. And you're just going to wither away if you switch to the McDougall diet, a protein deficient diet. The truth is starches are loaded with protein. As a matter of fact, of the calories that are present in common starches, 6% to 28% of the calories are from protein. And how much protein do you need? Well, think about the greatest time of growth in your life. That's when you were a baby. And what's the ideal food for a baby? Human breast milk. And how much protein does human breast milk have in it? 5% of the calories are from protein. So we have sweet potatoes that are 6% protein. We have regular potatoes that are 11% protein. We have oatmeal that's 16% protein, and beans that are 28% protein. And by the way, those proteins are complete in all the amino acids and properly balanced, so you don't have to worry about that either. So a starch-based diet is loaded with protein. I mean, think about it for a minute. How many friends do you have who are protein deficient? No, you don't have any friends that have protein deficiency. How many friends do you have that suffer from problems of excess? Excess fat, excess calories, and really excess protein too. That's right, people have problems from too much protein. That's what's harmful. So when you tell your friends that you're going to go on a diet that's traditional, a diet of rice, corn, potatoes, a starch-based diet, start to argue with them if they counter you about the fact that this is a very sufficient diet in protein. Ask them to prove it to you. Show you the evidence that a starch-based diet is protein deficient. I can show you the evidence that a starch-based diet is very protein sufficient. In fact, visit my website. You'll find that article. It's called When Friends Ask, Where Do You Get Your Protein? I'm Dr. John McDougall. Thank you for listening.
Okay. So if we just think about for a minute, and I know we've talked about this in other classes too, in the introductions and whatnot, that, you know, where do you get your protein? And so you just think about for a minute, all the largest land mammals on the planet. So elephants, rhinoceros, lowland gorillas, hippopotamus, you know, a giant ox, you know, they're herbivores. All they eat is plants. And so they're getting all the protein they need from the plants because all the plants have protein. And actually, to be even more accurate, all protein comes from plants. At some point, every single molecule of protein that you eat, no matter where you get it from, was from a plant, and at some point came from a plant, because only plants can basically take nitrogen from the atmosphere. So protein is basically nitrogen-based amino acids, and it's a nitrogen molecule is what their base is, and so that all comes from plants that fix the nitrogen from the atmosphere, and that's where you get protein basically. And so the only reason that anything animal or anything has protein is because some animal had to eat a plant at some point. And a good, you know, if you haven't watched the documentary The Game Changers on Netflix, that's a really good one to kind of help you understand protein and where it comes from, because it's such a, you know, it's such a marketing tool. I mean, protein really, it's not a nutrient of concern in any way. We get enough, as long as we get enough calories, we get enough protein. And so it's just this marketing thing. I mean, go look up and down the aisle at like Costco over in the snack area. Everything's like protein powders and protein this, protein that. So we have this fixation on protein because it's just a marketing tool, and it's so antiquated as far as where we got the guidelines. And I could probably spend an hour lecturing about where the protein requirements and guidelines all came from, and why did we get so off track with it, and why is it such a big deal. And so, you know, it's not even worth the breath, because it's not a nutrient of concern. Basically, where the question we should be asking is, where do you get your fiber, not where we get our protein, because as long as you get enough calories, you will get enough protein, period. So this slide is the only thing you need. And you know, like Charlie likes to reinforce this as well, because I don't think it probably gets stated enough, because it is something that those of us in the nutritional sciences, were, you know, academic nutrition, we're like, this is not a nutrient of concern. And just as long as you get enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. But everybody over and over, that's always the first question that anyone asks when you talk about eating a more whole food plant-based diet is, well, where's your protein on your plate? Where are you getting your protein? It's like, well, it's in everything I'm eating on my plate here. But yeah, go ahead and comment, Charlie.
Yeah, so the magic of fiber, the average American has been eating 14, 15 grams of fiber. The countries around the world, or cultures that are actually healthy, are eating 60, 80, and up to 100 grams of fiber per day. So you can get that if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, but if you're eating the standard American diet fare, you're going to be fiber deficient. Remember, fiber is the food for your microbiome, which produces chemicals which shut off your desire to eat, and also produce serotonin, those feel-good hormones. That's my brief clip for the night.
So yeah, so protein is not a nutrient of concern. It's the fiber that's the nutrient of concern. So it's all you really need to take away from protein. And then I don't know if you picked that up, I've mentioned it before as well, is that, you know, think about when you're a baby, human breast milk, Dr. McDougall said 5%. I've read between 6 and 7% of the calories in human breast milk are protein. And so think about that. Our RDA is like, 10, 15% protein, if not more. And most Americans are eating 20, 30, 40% of their calories from protein. It's like, that's ridiculous. It's like the time in your life you needed the most protein when you were an infant, human breast milk being the perfect food for the growing human baby, only 6% of the calories are protein. And so why would we ever there's never a time in our lives we'll need more than that. And so it's just kind of silly that we're so fixated on it. And if you're eating 100% whole food plant-based diet, usually about 10 to 15% of the calories are coming from protein. If you're someone that really likes beans and you're eating a lot of beans, more than the average person, beans are upwards of 25% of the calories are protein. And so you might even be getting closer to 25% of your calories from protein, which is, over twice as much as you need. And so you might have remembered Charlie's slide from his introduction where he showed, 500 calories of plant food versus animal food, and they had the exact same amount of protein in them. So it's just it's one of those things where it's like, whenever someone says the word protein, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me, because it's just unimportant. Yet in our culture, it's just like, it seems like it's still the most important thing that everyone fixates on. It's like, well, it's not. It's like, just as long as you're getting enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. So enough said about protein. Any questions about protein? Okay, well, I'm going to show a couple of Dr. Greger videos to kind of sum up this whole idea of reductionism versus holism, and kind of what place it has in our knowledge of nutrition and what's important about nutrition and health. So let's listen to Dr. Greger.
Research in human nutrition over the last 40 years has led to numerous discoveries and to a comprehensive understanding of the exact mechanisms behind how food nutrients affect our bodies. However, the epidemics of diet-related chronic diseases, obesity, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, heart disease, stroke, cancers, dramatically increases worldwide year after year. Why hasn't all this intricate knowledge translated into improvements in public health? Maybe it has to do with our entire philosophy of nutrition called reductionism, where everything is broken down to its constituent parts, where food is reduced to a collection of single compounds with supposed single effects. The reductionist approach has traditionally been and continues today as the dominant approach in nutrition research. For example, did you know that mechanistically there's a chemical in ginger root that downregulated 4-ball myristate acetate-induced phosphorylation of ERK1, 2, and J and K MAP kinases? That's actually pretty cool, but not while millions of people continue to die of diet-related diseases. We already know that 3/4 of chronic disease risk, diabetes, heart attacks, stroke, cancer can be eliminated if everyone who didn't followed 4 simple practices: not smoking, not being obese, half an hour of exercise a day, eating a healthier diet, defined as more fruits and veggies and whole grains and less meat. Think what that could mean in terms of the human cost. Right? We already know enough to save millions of lives. So shouldn't our efforts be spent implementing these changes before another dollar is spent figuring out whether or not some grape skin extract can lower cholesterol in zebrafish? Or even Whole Foods, for that matter. Why spend taxpayer dollars clogging the arteries of striped minnows by feeding them a high cholesterol diet to see if hawthorn leaves and flowers have the potential to help? Even if they did, and even if it worked in people too, wouldn't it be better to just not clog your arteries in the first place? This dramatic drop in risk, this increase in healthy life years through preventive nutrition need not involve superfoods or herbal extracts or fancy nutritional supplements, just healthier eating. When Hippocrates said something like, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food, he didn't mean that foods are drugs, but rather that the best way to remain in good health may be to maintain a healthy diet. Whereas the historical attitude of the field of nutrition may be best summed up by the phrase, eat whatever you want after you eat what you should. In other words, eat whatever you want as long as you get your vitamins and minerals, a mindset epitomized by breakfast cereals, providing double-digit vitamins and minerals, but the road to health is not paved with Coke plus vitamins and minerals. This reductionistic attitude is good for the food industry, but not actually good for human health. Because if food is just good for a few nutrients, then you can get away selling vitamin fortified Twinkies. We need to shift from the concept of just getting adequate nutrition to getting optimal nutrition, not just avoiding scurvy, but promoting health and minimizing our risk of developing degenerative diseases. Bringing things down to their molecular components works for drug development, discovering all the vitamins, curing deficiency diseases, but in the field of nutrition, the reductionist approach is beginning to reach its limits. We discovered all the vitamins more than a half century ago. When's the last time you heard of someone coming down with scurvy or pellagra or kwashiorkor, the classic deficiency syndromes? Whereas, what about the diseases of dietary excess? Heart disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension. Ever heard of anyone with any of those? Yet we continue to have this deficiency mindset when it comes to nutrition. When someone tries to reduce their consumption of meat, the first question they may get asked is, where are you going to get your protein? Rather than, wait a second, if you start eating like that, where are you going to get your heart disease from? The same deficiency mindset led to the emergence of a multi-billion-dollar supplement industry. What about a daily multivitamin just as insurance against nutrient deficiency? Better insurance would be to just eat healthy food.
One more here.
The prevalence of chronic diseases like diabetes has skyrocketed, as have the number of articles published about diabetes in medical journals. Why does our wealth of academic knowledge not translate more directly into making things better? Maybe it's our overattachment to the reductionistic mindset that proved so successful with acute deficiency diseases, but may actually represent an obstacle to successfully battle chronic disease, as I've touched on before. Health these days seems to be reduced to a highly commercialized commodity in which we're marketed all sorts of high-cost, high-tech tests and treatments of dubious value with substantial risks attached, which is worrisome because most of the things that make us healthy and keep us healthy are cheap and largely available without professional help or commercial prodding. This isn't to say modern medicine can't work miracles, But what about the big picture? The 80% of death and disability caused by preventable diet-related diseases. But of course, the field of nutrition is commercialized too. It's all about profits and products and extracting nutrients from whole foods so they can be repackaged and marketed. Yes, food is best eaten whole. For example, just eat the broccoli, the blueberries, not some broccoli supplement. But the reason there aren't more studies on whole foods, fairly obvious. You can't patent them. Why should a company spend a lot of money, time, and effort to convince you to buy broccoli when any other company can sell it to you? That's why the field of nutrition can be more about marketing profitable products than educating people about the fundamentals of health and wellness. For example, the benefits of whole grains over refined grains is commonly attributed to the fiber. This allows the food industry to whip out fiber-fortified Fruit Loops and make you feel all better. But check out this ingenious study. Burgett and colleagues thought the extraordinarily low rates of killer chronic diseases in sub-Saharan Africa was due to all the whole plant foods they were eating. This turned into the fiber hypothesis, the reductionistic thought that fiber must be the magic bullet active ingredient. Well, hey, let's put it to the test. Refined grains have some fiber left in them. So what if you compared two groups of older women, both getting around 6 grams of grain fiber a day, but one group mostly from whole grains and the other mostly from refined grains? Who do you think lived longer? If it was just the fiber, there shouldn't be much difference because they ate about the same amount. But the whole grain group lived longer, significantly lower mortality rate. So this implies that it may be all the other wonderful things in whole plant foods linked to fiber that may confer important health benefits above and beyond the fiber itself. That's why fiber supplements wouldn't be expected to offer the same benefit. Food, not nutrients, is the fundamental unit in nutrition. As Dr. David Katz has pointed out, our culture doesn't want to hear that the active ingredient in broccoli is broccoli.
It's a good summary of the difference between reductionism and holism, right? So it's not just the fiber or all the nutrients in the food, it's the food. The food is the holism, and all the little individual nutrients is the reductionist. So any questions about that, about carbohydrates, fat, protein, reductionism, holism? Any thoughts about that, questions about that? Anything in the chat, Charlie?
There's one question about how much protein should older persons eat to reduce loss of muscle mass?
So the recommendation is to get about 10% more than the recommended dietary allowance. And so it's kind of similar for athletes as well. So again, as long as you eat more calories, then you're going to get more protein automatically. And so to maintain your muscle mass, the most important thing is to get that resistance exercise. So doing some light weights and getting weight bearing exercise and kind of being able to maintain your muscle mass that way. And then as long as you're getting enough calories. And so if somebody is underweight and, so they're kind of fighting to get enough calories, then if they're not getting enough calories and they're trying to exercise, they might not be getting enough protein, not because they're not getting enough protein individually, but because they're not getting enough calories. And so it's usually not a problem for most people, but we do occasionally come across people that are underweight and are actually trying to maintain or even gain a little bit of weight. And so then you just got to eat foods that are a little more calorie dense. And so kind of what I call the yellow light foods, which would be like your dried fruits and avocados and nuts and seeds and nut butters and things like that, because that's what athletes would eat more of too if they're burning a lot of calories. If you're just trying to get enough calories eating salads and non-starchy vegetables and lots of fruit, then you're going to have trouble eating enough food to get enough calories and thus get enough protein. And so it's, again, we can talk about percentages and the number of grams. It's think it's 0.7 grams per kilogram, 0.7 to 0.8 grams per kilogram is the recommendation. But Charlie and I don't even recommend trying to figure out. I mean, you can get you can get a chronometer or some apps on your phone that can total how many grams of protein you're getting if that's something you want to do. But it's even doing that is unnecessary. It's just a matter of getting enough calories to satisfy your hunger, maintain your weight or gain weight if you're underweight, which underweight would be a body mass index less than 19. So if your body mass index is between 19 and 24, that's considered normal weight. And then 25 to 29 is considered overweight, and then over 30 is considered obese. And so, there's body mass index isn't the end all when it comes to weight, but it's kind of the main tool we have as far as just knowing if somebody's normal weight, underweight, overweight, where they're at with things. But again, you don't even have to, count the number of calories, count the number of grams of protein you're getting, just as long as you're getting the resistance exercise to help maintain your muscle mass and you're getting enough calories. But again, getting those little bit higher calorie density foods, if you're struggling to get enough food to eat to get enough calories in, then you got to reach for those foods a little higher in calorie density, including the starchy vegetables, so your potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans. And if you're really still hung up on the protein thing, which I hope people are, can get past that, then those beans are your champion when it comes to protein, because it's like 20 to 25% of the calories are protein and things like beans. And whereas spinach is over 50% protein, but spinach is so low in calories that you'd have to eat so much volume of spinach to be able to get enough calories to get enough grams of protein. So beans would be your winners, and also some of the grains like quinoa is really high in protein as well. Anything you want to add to that question, Charlie?
The only thing that I want to emphasize, in my experience, the older population tends not to walk and move throughout the day, which if you don't use it, you lose it, the muscle mass. And, just eat enough calories, like Scott said, you're going to get enough protein. But I would say this is an area of life when you're getting older to move more and do those resistance exercises. And that's something that's really left behind a lot. The other question here is regarding fat hurting our arteries. When oil is not used, do the artery walls rejuvenate?
Yeah, if we stop injuring ourselves, it's kind of like Dr. Greger says, if you're slamming your shin against the coffee table, it's going to get all red and inflamed. And so if you hit your shin on the coffee table 3 times a day, like 3 meals a day, it's going to stay red and inflamed. But if you stop hitting your shin on the coffee table and stop eating the meat, the cheese, the eggs, the dairy, the oils, the refined sugars and flours, all those processed foods, you're going to stop injuring their arteries, and so they can actually start to heal. And the plaques stabilize, and some of the softer plaques can regress over time. Some of the hard calcified plaques may not, but you stabilize those plaques and you actually dilate the arteries, and so the blood flow increases, and so you're going to get more perfusion to the heart muscle and anywhere else the blood goes in the body.
Anyone else have any quick comments that they want to make before Scott carries on the low carb diet?
So hopefully you feel like you can kind of, when new information comes in, you'll be able to say, whoa, you read some article, saturated fat wasn't as bad as we once thought. And some of these things, it's like, well, you have to take that into context. Well, that's one macronutrient. That's not a food. And so the food's what's important, not the actual, just one of the macronutrients. And when you look at things reductionistically, it can become confusing. It can become, you kind of lose the forest for the trees. You actually can manipulate studies so much when you're just looking at a single mechanism or a single nutrient. It becomes very, it can be very misleading as to what is really, how does that really help you in any way? Because it's not just the saturated fat that makes, bacon unhealthy. It's everything about it. It's fact it has no fiber. It has the wrong kind of fat. It also, causes oxidative stress and inflammation, and it doesn't have all the micronutrients and and antioxidants and things that the whole plant foods have. And so it's way more complex. It's the holism, remember, is what's important. And so when you see something about something very specific, just this fat or this carb or this vitamin or mineral, this nutrient, you can kind of go, well, yeah, that's interesting, and I'll listen to it and I can have a discussion about it, but that's not really what's important about nutrition. It's the food that we're eating is what's important about nutrition. So hopefully, you can kind of apply some of that stuff as you go forward when you hear things out in life about different things when it comes to nutrition. You can kind of keep it in context with what's really important. All right, so let's talk about low carb diets. And so I start off this particular slide with my own confession about things. So I followed an Atkins low carb diet for 3 years, about 15, 16 years ago now. And it's a confession because it's like, well, I kind of did what everybody else did. I didn't have any nutrition education, and it was kind of popular. It was like, oh, people are doing low carb and they were losing weight, and hey, what's this about? And so I read the Atkins book. And so then I was like, okay, I read the Atkins book. This kind of makes sense. I like eating a lot of these foods. And so hey, I'm losing weight. There must be something to this. And so then, it happened to be about the time I was in PA school at OHSU. And actually, I even did my master's project. So we had to do a community education, our master's project to graduate with our master's degree as a physician assistant. And we had to do a community education project, and I actually did low carb diets as my keto diets, low carb diets I did as my project. And so I actually, I was already following the diet myself, so I was already a believer. And so then I started looking at the literature. I started looking at the nutritional science when it comes to low carb diets. And I was looking at the studies that were done and everything. And it's like, okay, well, it was pretty easy to find some short-term studies that showed some health benefits as far as lowering cholesterol, losing weight, dropping blood pressure. So I could see these short-term kind of traditional markers that got better, and weight loss and things like that. And so I could kind of justify the beliefs I already had at the time. And they're peer-reviewed studies and whatnot, so they're legitimate. But it kind of in hindsight, we gain wisdom in our time. And in hindsight, when I look back at that time at this now, and I look back at that time, I realized I was doing everything backwards. And what that means is I had already read a book and formulated an opinion, and then I searched the literature to justify or substantiate my belief at the time. And I realize now I was doing things backwards. And what I mean by that is really what I did later, what I did 9 years ago is I went, okay, I just need to learn about nutrition. What's the preponderance of the nutritional science and the academics in nutrition say about what's a healthy way to eat when it comes to nutrition now? And so when I did it that way, I realized, oh, I formulated my opinions I have now, the beliefs I have now on nutrition. I base that on what's the science say. So I was doing it backwards before. I had my beliefs and I searched for the specific studies that basically promoted the beliefs that I had. Whereas when I did it the right way, and I encourage you all to do it the right way as well, take the mistakes I made and realize that, oh, I need to formulate my opinion on what's healthy about nutrition, what's important about nutrition based on what the preponderance of the balance of the science out there shows us, and then formulate my beliefs and opinions and food choices and what I teach patients based on what the science says, and not the other way around. So I just wanted to kind of start off with that, and I'm going to show more about low carb diets here. So examples, ketogenic diets would be Atkins, the Zone, South Beach, Paleo in some cases, depending on how much animal products you would eat. So essentially what ketogenic diets are, or low carb diets are basically very high in fat, very high in protein, low in carbohydrates, low enough in carbohydrates so that you burn fat for fuel. So you deplete all your glycogen stores, all your sugar storage in your muscles and in your liver. And so then once you've run out of of sugar storage in your body, then you switch to fat as energy. And the product of that are ketones. And so our brain cannot use, it can only use sugar for energy. It can't use fat or protein for energy. It has to use sugar. And so how the body gets around that is when you start burning fat for energy, you produce ketones, and the ketones are a type of sugar that can cross the blood-brain barrier and can fuel your brain. And so this is a defense mechanism we've developed over millions of years to save us from starvation, because we're hunters and gatherers is how we're designed. And so when we run out of glycogen stores in our liver and our muscles, and we're still trying to find food, we have to be able to have this backup supply to be able to burn our fat to be able to survive. And once we run out of fat, then we actually start burning a lot of protein from our muscles. We start breaking down protein, which is a much more complicated process, a very expensive process. So that's what ketosis is, what these low carb diets will dwell upon to lose weight. And I talked a little bit about low carb diets when I did when we did the weight management class. I did talk a little bit about how this works, but I think it's good to go over it again because it is such a popular diet way of eating right now. But it comes with risks. I mean, there's a lot of it's actually a kind of a state of illness. It's actually a low level of illness. It suppresses your appetite, has some other side effects. It causes bad breath. It causes constipation, kidney stones, gallstones. There's all kinds of other side effects that are not so good with this way of eating. And when it comes, and I talked about it with the weight loss, but you tend to lose weight initially from because of the water weight, because of losing all the glycogen stores. You lose a lot of water weight in the beginning, but you do lose some fat, but you also do lose some muscle over time when you lose weight really rapidly. So that's not so good either. And then a lot of the other reason that people will tend to lose weight over time is also because, well, you've cut out a lot of calories because you've cut out a lot of the carbohydrates. When you've cut out, the sugars and the flours and a lot of the processed foods, that's actually a good thing because you're cutting out foods that aren't so healthy and contain a lot of calories. And so you do lose a little bit of weight in that because of that. And then a lot of people that do low carb diets, keto diets, they do tend to eat more vegetables than they were before. And so that's another good thing. And so there's some good aspects of it. And I talked about it at the weight management class about how I have an easier time switching someone from a ketogenic type of a diet to a whole food plant-based diet than I do from a standard American diet to a whole food plant-based diet, because at least they care about they're changing their diet and they care about making a change to lose weight and improve their health. But again, it does come with some risks. And I want to show a video from Dr. Greger about one of the main concerns with eating a low carb, animal based ketogenic low carb diet is heart disease. And so let's watch this video.
People going on low carb diets may not see a rise in their cholesterol levels. How is that possible? Because weight loss by any means can drop our cholesterol. We could go on an all Twinkie diet and lower our cholesterol if we were unable to eat the dozen daily Twinkies necessary to maintain our weight. That's why a good cocaine habit can lower cholesterol. Chemotherapy can drop cholesterol like a rock. Tuberculosis can work wonders on one's waistline. Anything that drops our weight can drop our cholesterol, but the goal isn't to fit into a skinnier casket. The reason we care about cardiovascular risk factors like cholesterol is because we care about cardiovascular risk, the health of our arteries. Well, now we have studies that have measured the impact of low carb diets on arteries directly. And a review of all the best studies done to date found that low carb diets impair arterial function, as evidenced by a decrease in flow mediated dilation, meaning low carb diets effectively cripple people's arteries. And since the meta-analysis was published, another study found the same thing: dietary pattern characterized by high protein and fat with low carbohydrate associated with poorer peripheral small artery function, again, measuring blood flow into people's limbs. Peripheral circulation is great, but what about circulation in the coronary arteries that feed our heart? There's only been one study ever done measuring actual blood flow to the heart muscles of people eating low-carb diets, and this is it. Dr. Richard Fleming, an accomplished nuclear cardiologist, enrolled 26 people into a comprehensive study of the effects of diet on cardiac function using the latest in nuclear imaging technology, so-called SPECT scans, enabling him to actually directly measure the blood flow within the coronary arteries. He then put them all on a healthy vegetarian diet, and a year later, the scans were repeated. By that time, however, 10 of the patients had jumped ship onto the low-carb bandwagon. At first, I bet he was upset, but surely soon realized he had an unparalleled research opportunity dropped into his lap. Here he had extensive imaging on 10 people following a low-carb diet and 16 following a healthy high-carb diet. What would their hearts look like at the end of the year? We can talk about risk factors all we want, but compared to the veg group, did the coronary heart disease of the patients following the Atkins-like diets improve, worsen, or stay the same? Those sticking to the vegetarian diet showed a reversal of their heart disease as expected. Their partially clogged arteries literally got cleaned out. They had 20% less atherosclerotic plaque in their arteries at the end of the year than at the beginning. What happened to those who abandoned the treatment diet and switched over to the low-carb diet? Their condition significantly worsened. 40 to 50% more artery clogging at the end of the year. Thanks to the kind generosity of Dr. Fleming, we can actually see the changes in blood flow for ourselves. Here are some representative heart scans. The yellow and particularly red represent blood flow through the coronary arteries to the heart muscle. This patient went on a plant-based diet and coronary arteries opened right up, increasing blood flow. This person, however, started out with good flow, but after a year on a low-carb diet, significantly clogged down their arterial blood flow. This is the best science to date, demonstrating the threat of low-carb diets, not just measuring risk factors, but actual blood flow in people's hearts on different diets. Of course, the reason we care about cardiac blood flow is we don't want to die, and a meta-analysis was recently published that finally went ahead and measured the ultimate endpoint, death. And low-carb diets were associated with significantly higher risk of all-cause mortality, meaning low-carbers living a significantly shorter lifespan.
And then after that, there was even another study done in Sweden that took patients that had already had a heart attack, and they put them on went on an animal-based low-carb diet. And I think it was a 5-year study. And after 5 years, they had a 51% higher risk of death from a heart attack than being on that diet. So it's just another reason it comes with risk. So, and I know Charlie will talk a little bit when he does the diet wars next week. He'll probably go in a little more depth on some other diets and low carb diets. But any questions about that? Have you guys heard about the plant paradox, the Dr. Gundry diet? Is that something you guys have heard of? This is just another good video that Dr. Greger has about that particular diet. It was when I did this lecture originally, it was a little bit more in vogue, you know, how these diets come and go and stuff. But I'll show you this. It's things that don't pass the sniff test. So, you know, this particular diet, the anti-lectin diet, Dr. Gundry plant paradox, says avoid plant foods containing lectins, such as some whole grains and beans. And which doesn't, when I say it doesn't pass the sniff test, as well, the blue zones all eat lots of whole grains and beans. And beans was the one food they all had in common. So the longest lived populations on the planet eat lots of beans. So how could these lectin containing beans be bad for us? It doesn't really pass the sniff test. But let's watch Dr. Greger's evaluation of this.
Earlier this year, I started getting emails about this book, The Plant Paradox, purporting to expose the hidden dangers in healthy foods that cause disease and weight gain, foods like beans and whole grains and tomatoes. Why? Because of lectins, which is a rehashing of the discredited blood type diet from decades ago. They just keep coming back. Yeah, but this was written by an MD, which, if you've seen my medical school videos, you'll know is effectively an anti-credential when it comes to writing diet books, basically advertising to the world that you've received likely little or no formal training in nutrition. Dr. Atkins was, after all, a cardiologist. But look, you want to give the benefit of the doubt. The problem is that it doesn't even seem to pass the sniff test. I mean, if lectins are bad,
then beans would be the worst. And so bean counters would presumably find that bean eaters cut their lives short, whereas the exact opposite may be true. With legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils found to be perhaps the most important dietary predictor of survival in older people in countries around the world. As Dan Buettner points out in his Blue Zones work, lectin-packed foods are the cornerstone of the diets of all the healthiest, longest-lived populations on the planet. Plant-based diets in general and legumes in particular are a common thread among longevity blue zones around the world. The most lectin-lush food there is. And if lectins are bad, then whole grain consumers should be riddled with disease, when in fact, whole grain intake is associated with a reduced risk of coronary heart disease, the #1 killer of men and women, strokes too, and total cancer and mortality from all causes put together, meaning people who eat whole grains tend to live longer and get fewer respiratory diseases, infectious diseases, diabetes, and all non-cardiovascular, non-cancer causes to boot. And not just in population studies. As I've shown, you can randomize people into whole grain interventions and prove cause and effect benefits. The same with tomatoes. You randomize women to a 1.5 cups of tomato juice or water every day, and all that nightshade tomato lectin reduces systemic inflammation or has waist slimming effects, reducing cholesterol as well as inflammatory mediators. So when people told me about this book, I was like, let me guess, he sells a line of lectin blocking supplements. And what do you know? Assist your body in the fight against lectins for only $79.95 a month. It's only like $1,000 a year, a bargain for pleasant bathroom visits. And then, of course, there's 10 other supplements. So for only $8,000 or $9,000 a year, you can lick those lectins. Oh, did I not mention his skincare line? Firm and Sculpt for an extra $120. All so much more affordable when you subscribe to his VIP club. But you still want to give him the benefit of the doubt. People ask me all the time to comment on some new blog or book or YouTube video, and I have to sadly be like, look, there are 100,000 peer-reviewed scientific papers on nutrition published in the medical literature every year, and we can barely keep up with those. But people kept emailing me about this book, so I was like, fine, I'll check out the first citation. Chapter 1, citation 1, forget everything you thought you knew was true. Diet books love saying that. For example, eating shellfish and egg yolks dramatically reduces total cholesterol. What? Egg yolks reduce cholesterol? What is this citation? This is the paper he cites, and here it is. By now, you know how these studies go. How do you show a food decreases cholesterol? You remove so much meat, cheese, and eggs that overall your saturated fat falls. In this case, about 50%. If you cut saturated fat in half, of course, cholesterol levels are going to drop. So they got to drop in cholesterol, removing meat, cheese, and egg yolks. Yet that's the paper he uses to support his statement that egg yolks dramatically reduce cholesterol. I mean, it's unbelievable. That's the opposite of the truth. Add egg yolks to people's diets and their cholesterol goes up. I mean, how dare he say this? And it's not like some, harmless foolishness like saying the earth is flat or something. Heart disease is the #1 killer of men and women. This could actually hurt people. So much for my benefit of the doubt.
Be challenging out there to read different books and things. You got to know who to trust. Charlie and I trust nutritionfacts.org and many others. So, and then just a review of kind of some of the other diets, and talked a little bit about this previously, but so Weight Watchers, appetite control with appetite suppressants, portion controlling, calorie counting, Jenny Craig, Slim Fast, Nutrisystem, eat less, exercise more, that kind of messaging. And again, Charlie will go over more of the diet wars next week. And then just kind of the 3 basic philosophies, just kind of a good review. Calorie density, dilution is the solution. That's kind of how the losing weight with the whole food plant-based diet uses the concept of calorie density. And then ketogenic diets, the high fat, high protein, low carb approach. So that works as well, but it's another for when you're just looking at weight loss, but it comes with risks. We're trying to get healthy here, and weight loss is a nice side effect, but you can lose weight lots of ways, but it doesn't necessarily mean all the different ways are healthy. So because of the risk of heart disease and whether it's sustainable or not and whatnot with the ketogenic low carb diets. And then the third philosophy is just portion control, appetite suppression. So just, eat less, exercise more kind of messaging, which you're always going to be fighting your hunger drive. And that's why I write good luck there on that. But I just wanted to review those three basic philosophies. And then any other questions about any of these last slides? I was kind of going fast there at the end because we're about out of time. I wanted to give time for questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you listed the zone diet underneath the ketogenic diets, is that the same as the blue zones, or is that a different diet?
No, that's a different, the zone diet was just one of those low carb type of diets. There was different, South Beach and those different names for the different ones. But yeah, no, that's not the blue zone diet. Good question.
And my other question is the study, I think it was in Sweden, about the heart disease risk and going on a ketogenic like diet for, I don't know, 6 months or something?
It was 5 years.
Oh, 5 years, right. Did they have to sign something ahead of time? They probably had to sign something saying that they understand that it might be risky or something like that, because I know like ethically, right? Like when you do studies, isn't there something like sometimes you can't even do studies anymore because it could harm people. So how did that work?
I believe that one was probably a prospective study. So they just followed people that just happened to be that, basically they can look at a larger population and follow people that, okay, so all these people in this study have had a heart attack. And so let's follow what they're doing. And so that they picked up the ones that were already eating a low carb diet and then followed their outcomes over 5 years.
Right. So instead of giving them those foods, like.
Yeah. So it's not yeah, exactly. Because that would be hard to get past an ethical board. But there's so many people are doing ketogenic diets. It's pretty easy. Like that, one that Dr. Greger talked about, where Dr. Fleming did the study on people following a vegetarian diet, and then just so happened that some of them decided, because it's popular, decided to switch to the low carb diet. And so then it was a great opportunity to see, oh, they just did it. He was probably, like he said, he was probably mad at first because it would mess up his study, but then he saw how, oh, wow, this is a great opportunity. I can see the difference between those eating the more plant-based diet versus the low carb diet. What's it do to their heart arteries? And shows, wow, it makes it clogs up their arteries, worsens their blood flow. So yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. Stop sharing there. Other questions? So I think, when we're talking about like next week with the diet wars and everything, I think it'll just keep coming back to that same, philosophy of, who do you trust? And, what we follow is what the world nutrition academics throughout the world agree on a consensus, which is, a mostly whole food plant-based diet, the blue zones, and all the different, the World Health Organization, the Harvard School of Public Health, the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, a lot of these, if you review Charlie's introduction class, he kind of goes through a lot of the organizations and countries and other academics in nutrition that have a consensus that it's a mostly whole food plant-based diet, which is best for human health, for feeding the planet, for the environment, sustainability, all those things. And but when we, if you just read some book or just take the advice of some random person out there, then you're kind of taking a chance, because it's kind of going against what the academics in nutrition recommend. And so it's kind of like buyer beware out there. And when, like Dr. Greger says, it's like when it comes to a toaster, if someone at the gym says, hey, this is a great toaster and you should get it, it's one of the best toasters I've ever had. It's like, yeah, well, okay, you can buy that toaster and not do any research. Don't look at your own. Don't look at what the reviews are or anything like that. Well, it's just a toaster, so maybe you're out $50, but you took a chance. You just basically went with the advice of someone at the gym or whatever. But when it comes to something as important as your health, when it comes to what you're eating, how important what you put in your body, how important that is to your overall health. Hey, you should do your homework. You should know who to trust, and not just, just because some person at the gym riding the bike in the spin class next to you says, oh, you should go low carb. I've lost lots of weight. You should really think about that before you take that person's advice. So, because there's a lot more writing on that than just, a new toaster. So it should be something that takes a lot of thought, a lot of careful thought, and knowing who to trust. And we trust in nutritionfacts.org because of the whole myriad of people that review all the 100,000 nutritional papers published every year. And you can go back to that on the class website where the videos are. And here, I'll share my screen real quick while I'm talking to see what goes into all of that. Go to the class website here real quick.
While you're doing that, I might add, it's Dr. Greger, but he is backed up by so many others. Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Clapper, Dr. Bernard, Dr. Joel Furman. All these people are giving the same message, supporting each other. There might be some slight variations, but the theme is eat plants as they're grown in nature.
So on the homepage of the class website under videos, you can scroll down, and I actually have the behind the scenes. This is a good one to watch if you haven't watched it yet. Kind of how he goes about making these videos and all that goes into it. And there's the calorie density one I have saved there, which had the thing on the carbohydrates I showed tonight, as well as the calorie density. And this is a new video I put up. It's a good one if you want a good inspiring story of Dr. Sarai Stanzik, who put her multiple sclerosis in remission with a whole food plant-based diet and lifestyle. So that's an inspiring one if you want to watch that. I put that up just this last week, but yeah, so check out some of those.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I recently read an entire publication. National Geographic put out a special publication about the blue zones.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very interesting. I was very surprised to learn that, and I'm not suggesting that this is right or wrong, but it is the blue zones after all, that in all the blue zones, they do consume meat. They just consume meat in really small portions, more of like flavoring soups and flavoring things. But I was kind of surprised by that. What do you guys think about that? It was a great publication, by the way.
Yeah, and I think that hits it on the head that only out of all the 5 blue zones, there was only one subset in the Loma Linda, California, the Seventh-day Adventists. There's only one subset of the one blue zone in Loma Linda that is vegan. The rest of them are not vegan. But as you mentioned, they eat a very small amount of animal products. They're not vegan, eat a very small amount. But the other thing to kind of think about that is all the other healthy lifestyle behaviors they have. They move throughout the day. They have a lot of purpose in their life. They don't tend to smoke. They've been eating that way their entire lives. And so they've prevented themselves from getting a lot of the chronic diseases we do in America. Whereas Charlie and I always talk about in these classes, the people that we see every day in clinic and people that tend to come to these classes, they haven't been eating that way their entire lives. They've been eating the standard American diet. They're on a bag of prescription medications. They've had heart attacks and strokes and diabetes and cancer, and they are sick already. And so, to tell them they should eat the blue zone diet, well, that's going to be good. That's going to be an improvement. But if you look at the science in more detail, it's the blue zones are healthy, not because they eat animal products, but because they eat 90 to 95% whole food plant-based. And they're healthy in spite of eating some olive oil, some animal products and things, and the other healthy lifestyle behaviors. And so if we want to reverse illness that people already have, it's that ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. It's if you want to reverse these chronic diseases that people have, that's why we tell people to go 100% if they can, because that's going to give them the best opportunity to to get off their medications and get the health, reach the health goals that they want.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did remember they did olive oil as well, but very good publication, easy to read.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that's a good book. Definitely read the Blue Zones book if you haven't, by Dan Buettner. It's a good one.
Well, this was
Yeah, I bought that National Geographic as well.
It's great.
Yeah, and what I heard, I believe it was Dr. Greger. I don't know where I heard him say this, but he's like, we can do better than the Blue Zones. So
Yeah.
I just that was a really good way to look at it too.
Wow.
That's a lot what Dr. Furman says a lot too. Even the small differences that he has with, say, with Dr. McDougall, for example. Because Dr. McDougall always talks about, a starch-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet is a traditional diet. What he means by that is, if you look at all the populations throughout human history, we've eaten a mostly starch-based, mostly plant-based diet. So, the corn and the Incas and the Mayans and the potatoes, and so we've always gotten the majority of our calories in human history based on whole plant foods, mostly starches. And it's like, yeah, that's true. And I agree with that as well. But what Dr. Furman says, well, he would even say that, because I've seen Dr. Furman and Dr. McDougall kind of spar, so to speak, kind of get into a discussion. And they, 99% of everything they agree upon, but the 1% they don't agree upon is, Dr. Furman says, well, we could do better. We can do better than a starch-based diet. We can even focus on more greens and more, basically what the science supports is we can do a little bit better with tweaking a few things. And he kind of has the argument, well, the potatoes we eat now aren't the same as they were, 1,000 years ago. The grains we eat are not as healthy as they were 1,000 years ago, things like that. And then that was, what people ate to, just to survive. It wasn't, it's not like, just because, like paleo, for example, just because we ate, paleo diet by definition is a mostly plant-based diet as well. It's like 100 grams of fiber a day. And the only way you're going to do that is if you're eating tons and tons of whole plant foods. And yeah, they were eating some wild game and stuff, but that's, it doesn't tend to be how people that follow paleo eat, the way it's defined. But we could make an argument that, well, just because that's what we ate, 10,000 years ago doesn't mean that how we should eat now. We know more, we have more nutritional science, we have more knowledge and stuff. And so we should try to do better. We can do better. And that's kind of where the differences sometimes fall is, we agree on, 97 to 99%. And sometimes people will focus too much on the 2 or 3% that we don't agree on, so they don't have to do any of it. It's like, well, just because everybody doesn't agree 100% on every component doesn't mean we can't do the 95 to 97% that we do agree upon, So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions, comments? I hope you got some out of that, everybody. And we've gone past time. We'll spend some more time on what Charlie calls the diet wars next week.
Okay, Scott, thank you very much, and happy to have you all, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good night.
All right.
I want to know what they did with all the buffalo.
Buffalo.